Hey there, everybody. Oscar Abuli here, Deputy Political Director for Common Defense, former Marine Corps veteran. I'm here with Mr. Scott Anderson from UNRWA, who is the Field Director in UNRWA in Gaza. And we are here to have a discussion on the humanitarian aid work that happens in Gaza right now and has been for quite some time in Palestine. We're here to have this great discussion to understand more and more about what's happening there to get an on the ground perspective. Folks, to give you a quick little backdrop on the work that Common Defense has done, here is we have been a huge proponent of a peaceful solution in this situation. Understanding that within our ranks of Common Defense, we have tons of veterans who've been in conflict zones and have seen the unfortunate byproduct of conflict and how it affects the humanitarian population. And so we brought Scott here, a retired major in the Army, to give us his perspective on the ground and in the work on what's happening, because we figure that it's very, very important to highlight these stories, to understand that there is something else going on in this war besides the conflict itself, but how people are being affected day to day, have access to the basic things that we do day to day. And so, yeah, that's kind of the work that we're having here, and I'm glad that people can join us, and I hope this is shared very widely. But with that, Scott, thank you so much for joining us and being here. For a quick little time check, what time is it out in Gaza right now?
It is just 17 something wherever we are. So it's early, late afternoon or early evening, whatever way you want to describe it. So yeah.
Copy that. Yeah, and here for where I'm recording and where we're talking, it is 07 in the morning, the west coast of California. But we're happy to do this and happy to make this connection, because I think this is going to be a wonderful conversation that a lot of people will truly be interested in and take a lot from. So again, Scott, I greatly appreciate you being here. So we can kick it. Yeah, absolutely. And so to kick this off, we want to get kind of a bit of a backdrop on you and a bit of a backdrop of your work and what's kind of happening, or what it has happened, or what UNRWA actually is, and especially in Gaza, because UNRWA, folks kind of hear the acronym and kind of just start going from there and understand that it might understand that it's a UN-based project that has had long legs and long history within the area. So I'll kick it to you, Scott, so you can kind of give a quick little history on the work of UNRWA in Palestine and Israel.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks again for having me on. UNRWA was created over 75 years ago with a mission to provide services and relief and humanitarian aid to refugees in Palestine. That community has grown. We do this work in 5 fields: Gaza, West Bank, Jordan, Lebanon, and Syria. There's over 5 million, I think, registered refugees. Within Gaza, where I work, there's 2.2 million people. About 70% are registered refugees. So we've spent all our time taking care of them. UNRWA is the largest employer, or second largest employer, pardon me, in Gaza. We have over 13,000 staff, most of whom are teachers. We are at our core a human development agency. Education, which is the biggest program that we have and the most important thing we do when we're not doing responses like this to the horrible conflict. We have about 8,000 teachers, 300,000 kids, which I think would be the 3rd largest school district in the U.S. if you kind of overlaid it like that. Yeah. We also do health and relief, social work, as you would think of it. We do some solid waste management and protection work, and a lot of other things. It's been the one common thing in people's lives for 75 years, all the trials, tribulations that they've faced up and down. It's been the one thing that's always been there to provide, I guess, a constant level of support for them. And we've, like other organizations, we've evolved. Some things we've started new as, aid and everything has evolved over 75 years, and other things we stopped doing. As we pivoted to the conflict after the horrible events of October 7th, UNRWA is at least half the response. We do food for over 1 million people in Gaza right now. World Food Program does the other half. We're 2/3 of all primary medical care that happens in Gaza. We provide shelter and support services for about 1 million people. So, it's a huge undertaking in either context, be it conflict or peace. And that's what we're here to do. And, hopefully there'll be a ceasefire soon and ideally a peace deal soon. And this, could go into the history books. And we'll have two people living side by side in peace, which is what we all want.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for that. And I think an important thing out of the statistics that you were saying, Scott, 5 million overall refugees, 2.5 registered refugees within Gaza. If you can kind of explain the reason there is a refugee and what that means for UNRWA and how you support the refugee.
Yeah. So you become a refugee if you're forced to leave your home, fundamentally due to conflict. And there's 3 ways that you can stop being a refugee, and it's the criteria that UNHCR uses. First is to return people where they came from, right? So you go home. Second, you get resettled in your country. So like if you were, it's not a great example. I live in South Dakota normally. If I was a refugee from there and they settled me in California, then I'm no longer a refugee because I have somewhere. And then last, and it's a very small number of people are relocated to a new country, right? The U.S. accepts some refugees, not a lot, and other countries do as well. And those are sort of the 3 solutions to the plight of refugees. Unfortunately, none of those have occurred for people yet. And then it becomes a generational problem, and refugee status is handed down from generation to generation while they wait for a solution to their plight. So the people in Gaza have been waiting, as have others, for quite a long time. And this will only be resolved through a peace deal in the end, right? And through diplomacy and negotiation. And I would love nothing better than to see UNRWA go away, because that means there's a solution's been found and there's been a peace deal, right? So that's what we would like to see happen. But until then, we will continue to try to provide support and services to the refugee community.
Thanks so much for that, Scott. And you saying UNRWA eventually go away means that there's a structure, right? There would be a structure, a civil society to have its structure. So that's a great way to put it. And then as for refugees, near Sacramento, we have Afghan refugees who I've met families, who have left the country, like you were just saying as the example, left the country and have been resettled somewhere else. And here by Sacramento, California, we have a good amount of Afghan refugees who, are just families moving from one area to another, everyday families. We're just looking for peace and some sort of safety. And here we have some folks who have definitely found that. Scott, thanks so much for that breakdown. I'd like to before we get into a little bit more of the nuts and bolts of your operation in Gaza, a little bit more about you. So if you can give us kind of your backstory, your kind of run up to this moment.
Yeah, I mean, I've had, I think, certainly within the UN anyway, sort of many unique opportunities in life. And when I joined the Army in 1986, it was kind of the height of the Reagan era and college fund and GI Bill and all those things. And it was just an opportunity to do something different. And I joined the Army primarily to get money to go to college. And then I found I liked it. I liked the military, I liked the structure, the esprit de corps, everything that we do and stand for, and I just stayed and eventually went to officer candidate school and then did a couple of, I saw the Berlin Wall fall in my first tour in Germany. And then, you kind of fast forward through everything that happened in the Balkans and then 9/11. And then we're in Afghanistan and Iraq. I never went to Iraq. I was only in Afghanistan 2001, 2, and 3. And then I retired in 2007. So 21 years, lots of great opportunities, lots of great memories, lots of opportunity to serve. And then I worked for the government for a bit in Saudi Arabia, and I saw an advertisement for a job with the UN in Gaza and applied, and yeah, it was that simple. And it kind of worked through the system. And then I've been now in and out of this part of the world for the last 16 years. I left in 2018. I went back to the Midwest. I was working for the Department of Agriculture, initially in Illinois and then in South Dakota. And then when all this happened, I got a call from the UN and asked if I would come back and help with the response. And of course said yes, to help, and not just to help people in Gaza, but also in Israel. I mean, not everybody's affected by this conflict. It's not just one part. Um, and here we are now. And I came back as deputy director and eventually became director and also deputy humanitarian coordinator. Um, and yeah, it's a special place. I love Gaza. I love Israel. I hate what's happening here. I met my wife in Gaza in 2009. She's from Miami, so I think it was fated that somebody from Miami and Iowa would meet and get married from Gaza. Um, so yeah, it's a very special place to me. It's very special people, and what we all want is a ceasefire for the hostages to go home, and hopefully for that to lead to eventually a peace deal.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you what you did in the army.
I was an adjutant general corps officer in the end. That's what I became. I did like 10 years enlisted and just about 11 as an officer when I retired. Yeah.
Mustang. All right, awesome. So we got somebody who on the ground, hence your position.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
that's going to be my next question. So your position now, and being on the ground to then becoming an officer. So changing to the guard, Scott.
Yeah.
How was that for you? And especially, I did not know that you were in and out. For the last, I think you said what, 18 years or 16 years?
16 years. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess the changing of the guard, if you can explain maybe from what it was before the conflict into now, what was the changing of your position when you're more recent, right, billet?
Yeah. So I came back this time and the conflict had already started. The only reason I came back was post October 7th. So before that, things were as normal, I guess, as can be. We educated children, people went to the health center, all that kind of sort of normal stuff. And then you pivot to the response. And what you're just trying to do is the basics: get people food, shelter, healthcare, water, tents, clothes, those kind of things. Of the 2.2 million people in Gaza, 90% of them have been displaced, many more than one time. And every time you displace, you lose a little bit more of your material wealth, right? So it's a constant struggle to make sure everybody has what they need. It's a very young population also in Gaza. So over half the people are children. Well over half the people are children, and something like 65% under 18. So it's very young, which is also a bit of a challenge. And we've just been working to try to do that, to try to get everything that everybody needs. And it's difficult to see this. They had some of the highest literacy rates in the world in Gaza, highest vaccination rates, a very well-educated population. And now everybody's struggling just to survive. And that's what we're here to do, is try to help them survive until, as we said, this hopefully comes to an end.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then Scott, can you give an example of what I think you were hitting on, which is amazing, the highest literacy rate? If you can kind of explain maybe before the conflict, what education looked like, right? What would be a most kind of explanation of what education looked like?
Yeah. So we do primary education, which here is really up to grade 9, which is elementary, secondary, and a lot of it's around literacy and numeracy. The core building blocks for people to become educated. Um, Pretty large classes, 45 kids to a classroom, which is a lot for a teacher. It's bigger than most classes, I think, in the U.S., certainly at that level. And as they age, it gets a little more complicated because they separate by gender, which is not something we do, at least not as a normal course of action. In the U.S., there are some schools that do that. But it's just what you would think. It's just basic elementary school. You see the first day, and it's always one of the joys you get of the job. The first day of school, you see the kids for their very first day. Some excited, some nervous, some a little bit of everything. Same for the parents. But it was very normal. And now it's anything but that. It's very abnormal.
And if you can explain, now during the conflict, that let's use that exact same scenario. For a day for a kid for a go to school, maybe even the parent itself. You were just saying we all have been there, line up, school lunch, here's your pail, head out.
Yeah.
How does that look like now during the conflict?
Now all the schools are shelters. So you have families in classrooms, and that's where they sleep. So we were educating over 300,000 children before the conflict. We've managed to do some learning activity resumption for about 12 to 15,000 kids. So there's a whole bunch of children that are missing out, and our fear is it will become a lost generation because of COVID and now this. For the last 5 years, children haven't been in a brick and mortar school, and they haven't been in school at all really the last 2 years, other than a few lucky ones. And every day it's about survival. People are trying to find food, water, bathroom, shower, healthcare if they need it, but it's become very basic kind of things for them. And it's a very dangerous environment because it is very small, very urban. You know, the conflict is never far away, and you can usually hear something happening, even from where I sleep in the guest house we're in. So yeah, so it's also there's a impact on everybody's mental health, right? Because
Yeah.
it's sort of like an insidious stress. It's always there. It's not as overt. It's more covert. And especially for children, it's hard. An 18-year-old child in Gaza has been through 5 conflicts in their life, some longer than others, and that also has an impact on their growth as a human being. So we're trying to find ways to help with all that. We try to do some psychosocial support, create safe spaces for children to be children and remember how to learn and just how to interact normally. And that's what we do all across Gaza. And I spend, all day, every day working to make all those efforts come together and make sure we do everything we can to help everybody.
I appreciate that, Scott. Thanks. And you brought up another great example about how COVID is. And I think maybe for our audience or folks here in the United States, what that looked like for some of our children, or what school systems looked like during COVID. And I'll add a layer of what you were just saying, right? The environment of what's going on operating during a war zone, looking for basic things that you need, not just being able to run to the faucet and be able to get a drink of water in between classes or break, or use, the restroom.
Yeah.
It be a survival thing on top of trying to learn. So thank you for that explanation. Again, I think it's really important that our audience understands that daily functions are not the same. That there is this whole world, that Gaza is more than just a war zone, but it's families, it's children, just trying to make it and survive.
And it has real impacts. I mean, I recall I was at a hospital in Jabalia called Kamal Adwan. It was March 19th. I'll never forget the date. And it's a pediatric hospital. So you walk into the hospital and there's a big sign that says, "Congratulations, mom and dad," right? Because people are going to have babies. And they are still having babies, but it's not quite as joyous as the sign would make you think. And I met 2 different families that had 2-month-old babies that were starving to death because we weren't getting enough aid to them, and not enough nutrition was making it to the mothers so they could lactate and provide breast milk, which is the best option for children of that age. And it makes you feel well, one, like a failure, even though I know it's not entirely our fault, but that you should do more. And it's very hard to have a conversation with a mother. What words can you give them to try to comfort them, in such a situation? And we've had pregnant women that have had to walk across checkpoints while in labor. So it's for the civilians, it's an incredibly difficult environment. And to your point about flipping on a switch and all those things, most people are in tents now, so they don't have electricity. There is no water faucet. There's no bathroom in the house that you can go to at night. So it's very rudimentary living, very basic living, and it's just people trying to survive the conflict.
Yeah. And briefly before we started the recording, you and I both talked about kind of our families, and I'm a young, but I am a new father, and you with your time with your kids, and we can only remember those moments that we had, let's say in delivery rooms, let's say even after delivery rooms, let's say with, being there for our partners to be as supportive as possible. And then having that lens and that opportunity in a peaceful environment, and then not to have the exact same thing, right, in a war zone. So thank you for bringing that up. Again, I want to make sure that we understand as much context and understand and paint a picture as best as possible, a clear one that's actually happening. No editorializing this, just as Black.
Exactly.
Yeah. Scott, you brought up some basic stuff, some population needs: water, food, energy, shelter. Let's start off with water, and how UNRWA delivers water, or is in the space of being able to get potable water to its
So the scale is such that we don't have to, that we cooperate with other humanitarian organizations. UNICEF, for example, comes to mind, and there's a lot of NGOs that do this. And we do together to make sure that we're getting the widest distribution possible. Our primary focus in the refugee camps, there's 8 in Gaza, and they have water wells, and we try to keep them running. And we produce something like 800,000 liters of potable water a month. Not enough for the needs of the population, but it does contribute. In addition to the production, we do distribution. We have water trucks that go around to the sites that exist, the informal sites, and they deliver water to people who collect it in jerry cans or pails or whatever. It's a huge logistic operation in and of itself. And we work, as I said, we have to work with others to make sure that we're not missing people or that we're not providing too much to some people. Want to make sure everybody gets, what they should. And we do, I think, a relatively good job. We don't do enough to meet the emergency standards that's been established by the UN. They call them the sphere standards. Most people only have access to maybe a liter or 2 a day, and it should be more than that. And we're just working to improve that. We did have a success recently working with the government of Israel. We connected an electricity line to a huge desalination plant, Khan Yunis. So that boosted it from 20% capacity to 90% capacity basically overnight. And that was a huge success, great work for everybody. And, it greatly improved the distribution of water. So, with political will and desire, a lot can happen if we all work together.
That's awesome to hear about the connection, because I mean, that's a huge increase in water. I got a quick question for you though, Scott. When you were saying, and again, in the logistical background that I have from being in the Marine Corps, what do the water tank runs look like? I know there's always going to be a checklist and a move.
Exactly.
What's that look like?
And that's exactly what it looks like. So every driver has a route. They go to their camps, and they have spots where they stop, and people line up, and water is pumped, and they just kind of keep doing that all day. But you multiply that by 100, and it becomes much more complicated, right? And you need joint oversight and joint planning amongst all the people providing water, and that's what we do. And one of my roles is to help make all that happen. But it's a bunch of smaller delivery trucks just running every day and delivering water.
Yeah,
they start early and they go late.
And thankfully, everyone's safe, right? I mean, I guess you said it's an operation.
Nowhere is truly safe in Gaza. I mean, they're as safe as we can make them. We coordinate very closely with the Israeli military, so they know where people are moving. But you're operating in a combat zone. There are a lot of unknowns, a lot of uncertainty, and things happen sometimes that you wish wouldn't happen, but you just have to do everything you can to keep people, as safe as possible.
Awesome. Thank you for the additional detail on that. Let's pivot going from water. Let's go into food. What does food distribution and food access look like for the folks?
So one of the bigger challenges we face with food and other aid access, Gaza is not very big. I mean, logistically, I'm not a logistician. This is not all really that hard. The port that we primarily use from Israel to Ashdod to the crossing into Gaza is 50 odd kilometers away. And then inside Gaza, it's like we're moving about 20 kilometers on a flat road, right? So logistically, this is not a particularly difficult operation. The problem is that there's no law and order inside Gaza, right? The police were, identified as a visible symbol of the authority of Hamas, and they were asked by Israel to take off their uniforms, stay home. So they have, but what that's created is sort of criminal empires in the southern part of Gaza that we have to come through with aid to make it to people. And it's been difficult. We've had problems with looting. We haven't had any problems with diversion to Hamas, so that's a positive. But, last year we had a similar challenge where people were looting, but they were looting because they were hungry. Now they're looting for profit, which is an entirely different motive, and it's an entirely different solution. When people are looting because they're hungry, if you get enough food in, eventually that stops, and then things stabilize, which we did. So we've been struggling with that in particular. Drivers have been beaten up, our contracted drivers, trucks have been shot, aid's been looted and then resold. So we should get, 200 trucks a day, 250 trucks a day in, and we're not anywhere near that, unfortunately. So and food is bulky to move, especially, flour and rice. It's not easy. It's not
Not
hard,
an
but
MRE. It's not an
yeah,
MRE already.
MRE, right? And flour is the staple item for the food basket in Gaza. All right, everybody, they cook bread, and it's very much what drives the entire thing. So flour drives our acceptance by the community, which is the core of our security model, community acceptance. So we've been struggling for the last few months in particular to get enough food in. The World Food Program and UNRWA, we work very, very closely together. We have a great relationship to make sure we can provide food for the 2.2 million people that are here in Gaza. In addition to the crossing in the south, we have a couple in the north, and we do everything we can to make all this work, but we're not getting enough food to people, which forces them to make choices of, do they all eat today? Do they not all eat today? Do they make sure their children eat? And it's choices people should not have to make. And and again, we're working together with everybody to try to find solutions for this, but there aren't easy solutions, and you end up negotiating with families kind of one by one to get trucks through. I think we've had a bit of a breakthrough, but it's something that's very concerning, because this wasn't I don't want to say a nutrition-rich environment before the conflict. So the resilience that people have, the longer this goes on, the less resilience they have, and eventually it starts to impact your immune system, then it becomes a problem. So we need to do, more. We all know we need to do more, and we're trying to find ways that are creative to get more food into people. But it's a work in progress, I guess is what I would say.
Yeah, and thank you you brought up again an interesting point about profit. Now, food is for profit before it was for survival, and clearly for
Yeah.
some it still is. But now that there's this new layer on it, I'd
Yeah.
like I'm thinking over I think we're going over right over a year now of this conflict, how the more it evolves, the more it drags on, the more different elements are added to it. And you were, talking about joint operations for certain things, and it becomes a joint operation just to get to water. But now, after the joint operation to water, now you're worried about the security or other different aspects of it. So thank you again for understanding that, because I had no clue that was an additional layer that you have to go through. As a director, thinking, hey, here's the logistics for this, but then now I have to coordinate with these folks or these different entities as well. Scott, next thing I got for you, I know we've been kind of going down the basic infrastructure part. If you can give me a quick little backdrop on shelter. I think there's a video that your team has shared with me that kind of displays an overview of kind of what everything kind of looks like literally on the ground. And it's just the first thing I thought of, and you mentioned it before about the education aspect, how families are in classrooms because it's a shelter. What does shelter look like right now for folks in Gaza?
Yeah, I mean, it's a mixed bag, I guess. Shelter is for people. I mean, the lucky ones are in a school or in a building, but that's not the bulk of the population. Certainly, something like 2/3 to 3/4 of all buildings in Gaza have been destroyed or damaged significantly. So there's not a lot left standing. Now, for everybody else, they're in sort of tents or makeshift plastic or other structures. It's winter here now, and it's not as cold as like I say, I live in South Dakota. It gets pretty cold there. Probably, it's not, it gets down to maybe 10 degrees Celsius, a little colder at night, but it's very wet because we're right on the Mediterranean. It rains a lot. And, the tents or makeshift plastic structures are not built for that. So a lot of people have a problem with drainage of water and just staying warm, especially in the winter. In the summer, it's different because, tents are also not particularly cool. So it creates a different challenge. But you also have a lot of people in very small, like tents and, as I said, makeshift plastic structures, or even a classroom, right? A classroom can host up to 10 or 12 people. That's not a lot of room for much. You can maybe sleep and do a little bit, and that's it. So it's hard for them. And the bathrooms in the school buildings, they're not made for that many people, where you have thousands and thousands of people, right? You're used to having children. So it puts a strain on everything. And when you have a scarce economy like we have now, it adds an additional layer of challenges to the environment which people live and try to survive.
Yeah. Thank you for that. You brought up an interesting thing is the weather, and I think I just saw a report that there's rain going, and now what's happening with flooding. So what are you seeing right now with weather and the rain, like you were mentioning?
So last winter we were lucky, if you want to call it that. It was a pretty mild winter and there wasn't a lot of rain. This winter seems to be starting off much differently. It's been raining pretty hard the last few days. And for people that are set up in the sand, it's okay. It drains pretty well, right? Sand doesn't hold water. We all know that. But there are people that are, I think there's thousands of people that are in potential flood zones. And if you're on clay, clay doesn't absorb water. It just sits there. So we have to try to figure out how to drain it away. So it does, again, it creates another layer of complexity. Flooding also makes it harder to move food and water to people where they are, because you have to try to figure out how to get to them. So it is indeed a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, I can only imagine what weather looks like at that point, and especially in such a crammed area. I think you were saying, logistically, if people are moving within Gaza itself, to have that many people move into a certain area and then have such small shelter wherever they can, weather, rain is always going to add an obstacle to it all. Thanks for giving us that backdrop, Scott, on kind of the infrastructure and the work that UNRWA does there in Gaza when it comes to water, when it comes to food, and shelter. I got one last question for you and all through this, because I mean, again, we're operating under the idea of how logistics run to get things to people in safety. How has safety been for, like you were saying, the staff and for the people in a situation like this?
I mean, for humanitarian workers, this has been the most dangerous conflict around the world in a decade. UNRWA has lost 249 of our colleagues. The international NGO community has lost people, World Central Kitchen, and the UN as well. So it's again, it's a very small space, and it's just because of that, it's not a safe environment. There's nowhere that's really safe here. And you have parties to the conflict that operate very close to structures that should be protected. One of our advocacy points always is that they should stay away from hospitals where people are sheltering. And if they're going to, if the fight is going to occur, that it should be done somewhere away from that so people can find safety for themselves and for their families. I don't feel unsafe here, I would say. I think it's always more of just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. There's no deliberate targeting of humanitarian aid workers. But for the population, they don't feel safe at all. And you talk to them and they're always worried that something's going to happen. You talk to people that are working, they leave their family in the morning and they say they pray they're going to be there at night because they just never know. So it is not safe. Certainly for the population, it's safer for humanitarian workers, but it's truly not safe for anyone.
Yeah. And understanding the severity of that and operating in that has to be very difficult. As as both of us as being veterans, I think we both have our fair share of stories, and I like to ask you for yours. Under these moments, sometimes there's a bit of levity. There's a smoke break, a smoke break story. Yeah. There's a moment that kind of reminds you after, donning putting the hat on and operating and going at full speed and making sure, you're accomplishing your goals for the day and your mission, that there's a moment sometimes of levity. There's a moment of relief that's not brought in by anything external, but by being humans, right?
Yeah.
That are in the situation. I don't know if you can share a story that's like that.
Yeah, I think the thing for me is, I mentioned it's a very young population, and you see the kids playing. Kids are kids always. They're pretty resilient. You see them playing soccer, out in front, so you go out and play with them, and you fall down because I'm older and they're not, so I don't move quite as well as they do. And you always try to find just time with your colleagues, and you talk to your family. And one of the nicer benefits now compared to when I got here, even in 2008, is technology's come so far. I mean, you look at how you were talking, right? We're different kinds. So you can talk to people, and you just try to find the joy and the humor in whatever there is, during the day. And there's always a moment to do that. And, like I said, with me playing soccer with the kids, usually that moment involves me on my fourth point of contact. The kids laugh at me. But it's fun. It's something just to distract you, and it distracts them as well. So it's a good moment.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. Scott, this has been an amazing time and an amazing conversation for both of us to have. I think after hearing so much, right, after hearing everything that's happening in your work, the amazing work that UNRWA staff does in Gaza right now, I think maybe some of our audience members, knowing that Common Defense ourselves have been trying to be as active as possible, as being a great ally, a steward of peace during this moment, understanding again that there's a humanitarian part to all of this. We obviously think that our base likes to take action, right? What former military doesn't like to get out there and get some and back in their communities is the exact same thing. Our veterans still are active in their communities. They're part of community conversations. They're leaders in their community. And we always want to urge folks to take, the best action towards peace. And folks, I really want to encourage all our members and maybe folks who are tuning in that aren't members to support the UNRWA Restoration Act. The United States, unfortunately, has turned off the spigot to the funding of what UNRWA's work's doing out there. And for folks like Scott, who are out there working and working with as best as possible with limited resources, with a war going on at the exact same time, help is needed. Help is needed for these folks to be able to operate during this time. Again, I want to reiterate, Gaza is more than just a war. There are people, there are children out there, there are education, there's schools, there's things that are trying to happen during this conflict. So call your member of Congress. Doesn't matter what state you're in, doesn't matter if they've supported it or not. You can give them a call, say, hey, thank you so much for supporting this. But the Congress, the House has the Emergency UNRWA Restoration Act that we actively try to have our members call in and have their members of Congress support because it would be great. Scott, how else do you think, what other great ways for folks to be able to support UNRWA? Maybe not even just calling, their members of Congress, but any other ideas of best ways that folks can do that, day-to-day folks?
Yeah, we appreciate that. We always need funding
Yep.
because that's what translates into action on the ground. So, we welcome anything that can help with that. And, the thing that can help the most is for everybody to continue to call for a ceasefire, right? And we need to bring it into the conflict. We have hostages still here from Israel, including some that are American citizens. They've been away from their families now for over a year, which I can't imagine what that would be like if it was one of my family members. And they need to come home. For Israel, that's like an open wound for their society, which I understand, and they cannot truly begin to heal from what happened on October 7th, 2023 until the hostages are back. So continue to advocate for UNRWA, but as equally as important, continue to advocate for a ceasefire, which will benefit everyone here, Gaza and Israel and the West Bank. And that's what's needed first and foremost, so we can then help people try to transition to rebuilding their lives.
I appreciate that, Scott. That's an easy message for folks in their communities, again, to have these conversations, to understand that, this is we need a peace before anything else. No one wants to, deliver water while ducking bullets at the exact same time, right? People need the water regardless, but the person getting there needs to be alive to get there.
That's right.
Um, Folks, we're coming to the close of this all. I wanted to say thanks to Scott so much for taking out the time. Again, you brought up the technology, which is awesome that we can do this from coast to coast, from not even coast, your coast to my coast, right? About 10 hours away that we can have this conversation. It's important I think, for our members to learn, for the audience to learn, for the general public to learn. What's a good way to kind of stay connected to UNRWA so we can get our audience can get some updates?
www.unrwa.org. We have a website, and that shows everything that we're doing every day. And there's newsletters and stuff you can sign up for, for your inbox. But yeah, come and take a look, see what we're doing, and we welcome the support.
I appreciate that, Scott. Thanks so much again. I think from one veteran to another, it's easy for us to be able sometimes, and maybe civilian folks don't understand that, for us to just kind of walk into a zone and say, hey, we have to operate. Hey, we have to do this. I think for you to do this under this extreme and intense conflict speaks volume of your character. You said your training, right? You went into the service the exact same way I went in. Hey, education, cool. Recruiter got me, and then you kind of fall in love with the discipline. You fall in love with the idea and the principles of what you're doing, and you're taking that. You've taken it to here, and you've applied all those Any last comments? Any last things you
Just
want to?
say thanks. Thanks very much. And you're right, veterans, if you're looking for a new career path, humanitarian work's a great one to use your skills. We operate in dangerous places. We're all used to that. And they can always use that perspective that we bring to, getting things done.
Awesome. All right, Scott. Well, thanks so much. I appreciate your time so much. You stay safe. Hope everyone in your team stay safe as well. And hopefully, like you said, this comes to an end as soon as possible so we can get into the day after. And
Yeah.
I'm sure you still won't be out of a job then because you still need to operate, help folks out after. But
Exactly.
thanks so much for your time, Scott.
Great. Thanks a lot, Oscar. Take care.